From surveillance, punishment techniques, and the space race to the nuclear missile measuring contest, the Cold War era was a tumultuous time in human history. But it also played a major part in shaping up the world we live in today. However, not everyone knows the lengths of all the good, bad, and downright ugly practices that were not only permitted, but were considered standard during the age of the Cold War. And that is why today on Nutty History, we bring you all the creepy things that were normal during the Cold War. In the middle of August 1945, the USA dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japanese cities Nagasaki and Hiroshima. These bombs eliminated millions of civilians and turned these cities into radiation-laced graveyards for centuries. There is much debate about the necessity of a nuclear attack to bring the war to an end, but let's think about the possibility of Japan not surrendering even after the Fat Man desolated Nagasaki. What was the contingency that had been planned in such circumstances? Another atomic bomb, obviously. Apart from the plutonium-rich core of the Fat Man and the uranium-rich core of the little boy, another core of plutonium was supposed to be used if Japan hadn't promptly surrendered after the tragedy of Nagasaki. So, as usual, this core was turned into a tool for the Manhattan Project researchers that were interested in high-risk radiation experiments. According to Science Papers, in 1945, Harry Daghlian went into the lab alone and surrounded the core with tungsten carbide bricks that were meant to reflect neutrons to the core, pushing it closer to criticality. He accidentally dropped one of the bricks onto the core, which went critical, bathing Daghlian in the blue light of a deadly reaction. Now, we know it eerily sounds similar to the original story of Dr. Manhattan, but that is not what happened here. Unfortunately, it was the opposite. Instead of becoming an omnipotent immortal being, Harry Daghlian died 16 days later, suffering from immense radiation poisoning despite intensive medical care. Less than a year later, in May 1946, Louis Slotin was running a similar test, almost completely shielding the core with a pair of beryllium half-spheres, which he kept apart with just a screwdriver. That's just as dangerous as it sounds. Obviously, the screwdriver slipped, and, once again, the core went critical. Slotin's end was no prettier than Daghlian, as both were brutally blistered and suffered from extreme cases of burns, gangrene, peeled-off skin, and, well, the rest of it is just too graphic for us to describe here. The core was dubbed later Demon Core, and conclusively people at Los Alamos stopped playing hands-on with a nuclear core as if it were a baseball. But that doesn't mean the United States learned its lesson. Let us present to you the Atomic Veterans. From 1946 to 1962, the United States conducted about 200 atmospheric nuclear tests. That is way more than the other nuclear tests put together at that time. Approximately 400,000 servicemen enlisted in the U.S. Army, Navy, and Marines were ordered to attend these atmospheric tests, either as witnesses or as post-test cleanup crews. These soldiers not only experienced nuclear tests from as close as possible without being turned into charred turkey instantly, they were also ordered to walk towards the nuclear mushrooms to inspect them closely. As nuclear power and its risk were still new, most of these servicemen did not know about the effects of radiation exposure and did not question if their health was at risk. But sooner or later, many of these men developed serious health complications, including cancer. Some of the first atomic veterans were servicemen who were sent to Hiroshima and Nagasaki to help clean up the 2 cities after the atomic bombings. Approximately 255,000 troops were involved in the occupation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Some veterans noticed the effects quickly. Marine Corporal Lyman Eugene Quigley, who was sent to Nagasaki, recalled that when he got back, he had burning, itching, running sores on the top of his head and the top of his ears. Furthermore, he had sores that looked suspiciously similar to the sores developed by atomic bomb survivors. The doctors who examined him during his discharge examination in 1945 claimed that the sores were caused by a fungus. But nearly a year later, Quigley began developing stomach tumors that caused him massive amounts of pain. This was only the beginning of his deteriorating health, which included lymphoma, or cancer of the fatty tissue. Despite these warnings, during the early Cold War, the United States wanted to prepare servicemen for the possibility of nuclear war and place them only miles away from nuclear test detonation sites. Depending on the particular shot, servicemen were stationed approximately 6 to 11 kilometers away from Ground Zero during Operation Buster Jangle in 1951. The idea behind such tests was so messed up that these soldiers were considered expendable guinea pigs when you come to know what the authorities also wanted to research: the psychological impact of witnessing these explosions. Psychiatrists were present before, during, and after tests to assess the psychological effects. In the words of an atomic veteran, authorities were not going to let the opportunity go by to see what would happen to a bunch of men when they experienced such a travesty firsthand. Sworn to secrecy, many of these servicemen never told anyone of what they witnessed. If they told anyone they were involved in these nuclear tests, they could have been fined up to $10,000. Some feared that if they spoke out about witnessing the test, they could be tried for treason and shot. In the 1970s and 1980s, these atomic veterans began speaking out about their experiences. It was not until 1994 that the authorities openly apologized to all people involved with U.S. nuclear radiation testing, including the atomic veterans as well as those who were injected with plutonium without their consent. Yes, plutonium injections. Manhattan Project researchers would find hospital patients with bleak diagnoses, often proven incorrectly diagnosed, and inject them with dangerously high amounts of plutonium. I'm guessing the authorities were really desperate to create a Dr. Manhattan or Captain America-ish superhero. But in reality, it was all done to see how the body would hold on to or secrete the radioactive element. What makes this disaster worse is that these patients were not even aware of being injected with such a dangerously high dosage of such a dangerous element. Plutonium would be absorbed by bones and stay there for years if their ailment wouldn't terminate them. Shockingly, this nuclear madness doesn't end there. Some might say, how much worse can it get? Pregnant women? You bet. According to the Associated Press, in the 1940s, researchers at a free clinic at Vanderbilt University gave over 750 pregnant women iron pills. The idea, according to researchers, was to study how iron was absorbed by pregnant women. However, the iron was fed along with a certain cocktail they had to drink to swallow the pill. We do not know exactly what else was in the pills or what kind of concoction those cocktails were made of. The records of the clinic were destroyed during the 1970s, but there were still studies conducted on the concerned mothers and their babies, indicating that a handful of children died really young as a result of various cancers in the 1960s. Now anybody can put two and two together to determine what those cocktails and pills contained. Believe it or not, when somebody mentions Lab X, they are not talking about another comic book, but how creative and invested the Soviets were with poison manufacturing. Since 1921, there was an entire facility dedicated to perfecting poisons in Soviet Russia. Dubbed the Special Room, this facility had a particular goal: to discover poisons that were odorless, tasteless, and invisible to autopsies, or in other terms, the perfect assassins. This is where things get James Bond-like ridiculous. According to reports, the Lab X and the Chimera or the Chamber were able to come up with creepy stuff like fatal gases, such as gaseous cyanide, that could cause death to appear to be from a heart attack. They also invented crazy devices and weapons like a poison-tipped umbrella, or the idea to spray the poison on a lamp so that the heat would disperse it throughout a room. Targets included potential spies, dissidents, and political rivals. But the real messed up stuff was about the unfortunate test subjects who were sacrificed to perfect these poisons. Prisoners, intellectuals who didn't agree with communism, people who tried to escape Soviet Russia, etc., etc. The Cold War era was a period of paranoia, anxiety, and constant anticipation for an upcoming war, which fortunately never happened. Or else we could have been living in a post-apocalyptic world right now. Both sides were ready to sacrifice anything to obliterate the other side in the sheer hope of somehow prevailing in the aftermath of such a dastardly confrontation. One example of this desperation was the continued testing of biological weapons and exposing civilians and military servicemen alike during the Cold War, despite the Geneva Conventions. Not only did both sides stop developing biological weapons, but also expose innocents and use them in wars. The Soviet Union employed a Glander's biological weapon against the Mujahedin in remote locations in Afghanistan in 1982. Glanders is the scientific name for Pseudomonas mali, a bacterium lethal for horses and potent enough to incapacitate humans. Well, that is all we have for you. Tell us about any creepy things you want us to tell a story on, and thanks for watching Nutty History.